Season 3, episode 25, part 2. Chris is back in town. What happened, Chris?
Whole blocko went power out for a second. It glitched.
I have to tell you. So I'm listening to you talk, and then you freeze. And I'm like, the first thing I do, well, yeah, like that. And I'm like, oh, is this my internet? Because there's always that feeling of, because I told you when we started today, both of my boys were awake, which is rare. And, whoa, he's choking. Clough's okay. He hit mute. He's doing a little bit of a cough. He's good. So anyway, both of my now, if for people who aren't watching, he's pretending he's frozen. But anyway,
I'm glitching.
I'm like, oh, are my kids streaming? Like one's YouTube, one's Fortnite, and it's like all dad wants is to do the podcast, right? And then, so that's what I first thought. And I thought, okay, well, here we've got some fluency with this, meaning there have been times in the past where things freeze up on my end, and in real life, when you replay the video, when things freeze up on my end, things aren't really frozen in the program. So Chris is still talking. So I know not to jump in and be like, hey, Chris, are you there? Chris, are you there? When in fact, Chris is talking on the other end and everything's being recorded as if nothing's gone wrong, but things have gone wrong from my perspective on my side. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, what do I do now? It's frozen. I don't want to jump in because he's in the middle of talking about something. So I'll just send him a text. So I send the text, and before you responded, Chris, what happened was, you know how there's two of us on screen?
Yep.
It went to the thing where it went zoop, and it was just me on the screen. I'm like, oh, Chris has been kicked. So that's when I'm like, okay, people, Chris is gone. Oh, actually, I had your message by then, so I could tell people about the power thing. And then I shut down part 1. I didn't call it part 1 because I didn't know we were going to do a part 2. But while I was waiting for you to come back for part 2, I went to YouTube and I changed the title to Season 3, Episode 25, Part 1. So we're good. It's good to go. But it's funny. It's funny how, again, fluency. You understand how your tech works. You deal with problems. You troubleshoot. The minute you froze, I was like, my kids are going to pay. Chris is still talking, so I'm not going to jump in and be like, oh, I can't hear you, Chris. Are you there? While you're talking. And then imagine the video after. The podcast after, like, why is Roland yelling at Chris when I can hear everything Chris is saying? You know what that was for me? That was a leadership moment. It was a podcasting leadership moment where I was smart enough to remember how things usually would work when that happens, and then to stay calm and to deal with it effectively. I'm proud of myself. Part 2, baby. Part 1, I want to call it COVID-19 reality, and part 2, I want to title it I'm proud of myself.
Totally. I mean, and if we kind of just soak up the glitch, dude, this is going to happen next week. Because on one hand, I totally get you. The broadband suck is going to happen. Broadband suck is going to happen next week. And side note, I don't even remember what I was talking about. So think about that. You're in the middle of like a great conversation, and then you have something you perceive to be catastrophic happen, and you can't even go back to the lesson. I mean, I'll have to re-listen to it. Don't even bother upping me. We'll leave it wherever we were, just as a end of Clough's thought. I was probably talking too long anyways. But that was totally outside of the control. Like, that wasn't, this did not happen because you or I or anyone in our sort of like learning moment did anything. This was power going out in my neighborhood. So
the glitch.
This is going to happen next week. The second part to this too is it gets you kind of thinking, well, okay, there's nothing I can really do about the electric networks in my neighborhood. There's always been stuff. Sometimes calls are dropped. You know, I'm in a valley, so I'm surprised the power came back on as fast as it did, to be honest. Talk about interesting confusion that did happen as a side note. So you're thinking your kids are sort of sucking broadband. I go upstairs just to check on the family. My daughter's standing in like just at the top of the stairs. She's like, "What'd you do?" I'm like, so there's that kind of like weird other kind of accusation. My wife is she was standing. So we have a door inside our house that goes out to the garage. So often what happens, my cat will run out into the garage. Like he loves to go out into the garage. I don't even know what he does. We don't turn the light on or anything. He just goes out in the garage. Now, we have a light switch that's on the inside that we can manually turn like an overhead light off and on in the garage. On top of that, the garage door opener has a light on it. Now, the garage door opener light only goes on, we thought, when the garage door opens. So she goes out, checks on the cat, sees that. So the cat ran out prior to that, like before any of the power went out. He was out there. She goes out because he's good for like 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, then he's crying. He wants to come back in. She goes out and the light is on in the garage. Not the one that you manually turn on and off, but the one that only activates by the garage door opening. And she starts to freak out. She's like, the cat got out, because she's connecting dots between the only way this comes on is if the garage door opened, right? So there was that to kind of deal with. So all these little contingencies. This is next week, dude. This is next week when we, as a distance learning nation, goes full speed ahead next week with our lessons. Even if we're staggered, even if we're asynchronous, it's still going to be big load on broadband and power. Like, this is going to be an interesting horizon to sort of like take a deep look at, let alone what happens in our little universes of our houses with the kids, negotiating the schedules of getting. We had this conversation last night, Karen and I, like, okay, we have to talk about when's Jake going to be on? When's Maddie going to be on? Well, that's dependent on when stuff is kind of posted. It's dependent on, our meetings that we have. So I figured this whole thing could be, I would love if the power went out again, because part of this is just like, how do you then just troop her on? You're going to have to troop her on. Next week, baby, next week.
You got some big load, the glitch.
Yeah.
It's like...
Yeah, and still important, like, you and I flipped to plan B. Power came back up, but sometimes technology is slow to recover. I switched over to text and I said, hey, this is what's happening, right? This is also kind of a bit of a mindset to go into next week as well. Is like, do you have maybe a contingency plan besides getting emotionally like, like, what is your, what are some other ways that you can still either, at the heart of it, de-escalate yourself, get mindful, get present, breathe. How then do you regather? Not only yourself, how do you regather your class? How do you regather sort of like that lesson? How do you find your momentum? If this were a lesson and it was important for me to kind of connect the dots and make sure that the prior knowledge that was just 20 minutes ago is still connected with the new knowledge that I'm throwing down for my kids. What's your process there? Do you need to send out a message and say, hey kids, give me a moment. I'm just reviewing my notes. I'm rebooting. Let's reconvene on this in 25 minutes. And then you do your best. At what point do you then say, because I did offer up, do you want to do this tomorrow? And you're like, sure, we can come back tomorrow. But then I thought, well, we're here. I know that you're still kind of out there. We had the communication, so it's like, okay, well, let's just try dropping back into it for a little bit longer. I don't think we're going to blast through another hour of this, but at least we're able to kind of close well. We're able to kind of land back again and say, you cool, I'm cool. Okay, now we'll take care of our week. There's the podcast. This will be next week for many people.
I love that the connection you've made, connecting the dots to our little glitch, and that this is a minor... It's a minor issue that we're going to see this coming week, as you say. And it's funny, how your mind automatically goes to certain things. So right away, I'm like, I'm going to kill my kids, number one, because, I don't mean that, people, okay? I just mean like they know that I'm supposed to be podcasting and they're milking the broadband. So I'm like, my kids they're going to hear it from me. That's the first thing I think. And the second thing is, I love like the story at your house of the light in the garage and your wife thinking the cat's gone and your daughter's like, what did you do, Dad? Right? Like, I love it. But if we can move past that, it's a great reminder that these things happen. Sometimes it's nobody's fault, and that's okay. And sometimes it is somebody's fault, but we try to find a way to forgive them, right? We move forward, we figure out what to do next time to not have this happen. But if it happens, I think the bottom line is that it's okay. It's okay. So when you told me power issue at my place, I'm like, okay. So I shut things down. I didn't turn off my computer, strangely enough, because I thought, you're gonna love this. I thought I'm gonna go get something to eat and then I'm gonna come back and do some work for school. I know it's Saturday, people, but I've got some ideas and I want to get them out of my head and onto my screen so that my students can benefit next week.
Yep.
So it's funny, I go downstairs and my son is like, "You done?" I'm like, "Yeah, the power went out at my buddy's place." He's like, "Okay." So I go into the fridge and I get something to eat, and literally I sit down, get my fork, I'm right about to dig in, and I get a text from you. You're like, "Hey, you want to do this tomorrow?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man, let's do it tomorrow." So I'm just eating, and then you're like, because I know your computer's a beast. It takes like 3 days to load. So I'm
Yep.
like,
Yeah, I started
okay.
loading it up on Wednesday just so. Yeah.
But then when you hit me up and you're like, "Hey, it's loading fast. You want to get back on now?" And I was literally halfway through eating my food. My son now is outside because he won't go outside until I come down. He's on the trampoline, bouncing around. So I respond to you. I'm like, "Yeah, just let me finish up here." And I'll go upstairs, log back in, send you a link. Open the backyard door. I'm like, "Dude, I'm going back to my podcast." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "My friend's back on. We're going to finish it up." He's like, "Can I still play on the trampoline?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "Yeah, stay on the trampoline or come inside. It's one or the other." And that's it. I finished my food, put the plate in the dishwasher, came back up, and here we are live again. Um, Episode 25, part 2. I want to shift gears before we shut down. I would love if you're interested in talking about the podcast that we were on last Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. What are your thoughts after the fact?
I enjoyed my time talking with you and talking to Beth Lyons. I felt like she did a wonderful job of running like a smooth episode. I felt that like I know that she had some questions she wanted to ask us based on one of our podcast episodes and questions around like the content of her podcast and how it plays out. But
So it's read into us. Read into this
Read
podcast,
Into
right?
This is the name
Yeah.
of the podcast.
Yeah.
Sorry, and it's Beth Lyons,
Alana
Alana
King.
King.
Uh-oh.
It'll come to me.
Is it Lisa Corbett? Is she a part of it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Um, no, Lisa
No.
Noble,
Lisa Noble. Sorry.
because Noble Knits, I think, is her
Right.
Twitter
Okay.
name. Those three ladies, it's their podcast, but it was only Beth Lyons that was talking to us. The other two were probably like, we don't want to talk to them. You take this one on if you want, Beth.
That is kind of cool, though, when you think about it, having three people potentially doing the conversations for one podcast.
It's a very cool idea.
Never seen that before.
I love it.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before. That really will get some different POVs, and definitely the people that they are. I'm sure they have common people that they're connected to. But on the same note, I'm thinking there's probably people that might only feel comfortable talking to the individuals. You know what I mean? They got just a better relationship and sort of going into the podcast world, and yet it's all coming into the same kind of hangar. I like that. That's cool. It just kind of struck me the ingenuity of that.
It is pretty cool. It is pretty cool. So I felt like I had good feels after. I had good feels before too, because I mean, Beth is she's like a great part of the PLN, and she just seems like an open, good person. Like, at the end of the day, that's the vibe I get. So I felt good going in. I felt good after. I felt good during. But like seriously, I felt like she did a good job of managing the episode in terms of like talking to us both and asking her questions, but also being open to just seeing what comes her way. It was cool. It was cool. Like I said, it was novel to me, right? Because I don't talk to people about reading. I don't talk about what I'm reading, what I'm gonna read at a deeper level. I don't do that. So it was cool. It was fun. It was interesting because you and I have a relationship. We have a rapport. It was neat. It was neat to sit on the same call and not have to do anything. Like we were guests, so it's just kind of fun hanging out with you in that perspective, in that light.
I also had the sense of it sort of took somebody outside of yours and my bubble for me to learn more about you. Right? So it's like
That's interesting.
where the therapy gets outside of our couch on Saturdays for someone to kind of redirect and reframe and kind of draw out stories that you and I don't always get to. Like despite the depth and breadth of the stories that we've told on this podcast, there's still so much more. And, that's what I was sort of thinking about afterwards, is listening to you talk about talk about reading and your sort of how it arrives and how it kind of exists in your classroom and how it's represented to you. It felt like I was getting to know more layers of you in your thinking. I mean, part of that is also couched in when we talked about it on this podcast. It was so incredibly intense and sort of pinned to an emotional experience from your life. Like it's hard to sort of say, okay, let's talk about something. Let's sort of like pivot on that exact same point. It was like there was that one story that really kind of framed our episode. So it's cool to hear that there's still other layers to it. Like it's not just a stopping point. It's a seed point to your thinking and your pedagogy and how you connect with reading in a very broad fashion. So that's what struck me afterwards. I'm like, yeah, cool. I'm kind of getting a chance to learn, stuff about Beth, stuff about reading, stuff about myself that I hadn't talked. Like I haven't talked about the book stack, like never. Like I don't think I've ever mentioned that to anyone about when I was a kid and in competition with my buddy, and we would actually make fun of each other if we weren't making it through the book stack. Like I'd never actually revisited those memories in a reflective practice way and sort of connecting it to how I read now. So it was good to learn more stuff about myself too.
And I would agree, like it was neat to hear your perspective on certain things that you and I don't talk about or probably wouldn't talk about. It was really cool. It was like being a fly on the wall again.
Mm-hmm.
Except this time everybody could see me. Like I was there. So it was just interesting when she would ask a question and you'd start answering it. I would mute and just listen and be like, this is kind of cool. Like this doesn't normally happen. It doesn't normally happen. So yeah, I wish them well. I hope that it feeds them the way it feeds us, their podcast and what they're about, what they're interested in. I think there's nothing better for me than hanging out with people who I feel are being authentic about what they're up to, right? And I really get the feel from those three that they're into it for the right reasons. Mm-hmm. And I even feel weird saying that, but then I have to say that I feel like some people have a podcast and I don't believe that they're doing it for the same type of reason. I don't believe they're doing it. I just feel there's more to what they're doing than just for the sake of like the true like grassroots feel you get from starting a podcast and wanting to know.
Like they have an agenda. There's an agenda that they're just not. They're not kind of openly revealing.
No, they're not open. No, yeah, that's just me. Like, and that's why I'm not naming names because I don't feel it'd be fair. Because it's just
how it makes you feel.
It's how it makes me feel.
Yeah,
and that's me, right? Just like I can tell you that I know for a fact there are people out there annoyed at the way we run our podcast.
Mm-hmm.
They're annoyed because we're just doing what we want to do.
And we dare to call it a podcast.
Well, you know what's funny about that is that I don't dare to call it a podcast. Not at all.
I'm okay with it, but I think from maybe an external point of view, that because it doesn't, it sort of holds the conventions, uses the conventions according to convenience, and then just kind of moves on. And I'm like talking about the podcast like the podcast is, this is you and me. So if we accept that, I mean, we accept our responsibility and sort of going where we feel is best for us to get our thoughts out and for us to sort of continue a lot of the digital conversations that we're having throughout the week on other platforms. So I think that by nature, because this grabs a snapshot of our week, we're not always, I mean, we're not having to set up a guest every week. We're not having to sort of figure out our questions ahead of time. We're constantly immersed in this sort of long form discussion. That means we can arrive and just go start recording. We just happen to have specialized interest in EDU and obviously a love of our families and other interests that kind of feed our creative. And that all lands here. I don't know if I haven't come across something that fits that kind of same model. And again, I'm not trying to brand or market what we do as better or worse than anybody else, but I also recognize that prior to you and I doing this, I didn't notice other podcasts operating in the same way. So this could be kind of a space within podcasting, that universe, that on one hand is awesome. I really enjoy it. But on the other hand, also defies convention to the point that it doesn't sort of get the same traction that something that is scheduled weekly. Here's the questions that are going to ask. Here's the guest that I'm really looking forward to talking to. Wow, it was such an honor to talk to that guest. Like all those other kind of conventions that happen with podcasts, which are the conventions. Episode 110. But these there's little elements that we don't play directly with. We sort of look at them and kind of go, okay, we're going to kind of do our thing, whatever that thing is. But you're right, to sort of look at it as a podcast, maybe considering our experience with it, is kind of not the whole story.
No, there's much more to the story. And if you want to know more, then you can seek out Chasing Squirrels by Chris Clough or Roland Chidiac Connects.
Yep.
I used to operate more of the traditional style, interview somebody, have a theme, play around.
Chidiac, say the words. Chidiac Connects, right? You have to say the words. Well, you called mine out, right? The Chasing Squirrels.
I said Roland Chidiac Connects.
Did you? Oh, I didn't hear that.
I did.
Sorry, apologize.
You were too busy being selfish listening to your Chasing Squirrels. Anyway, I don't want to go down that road again.
Episode 110.
The bizarro world of podcasting.
Ooh, that was good stuff. Okay.
Yeah, so it's I wish them well. Read Into This is the name of the podcast. If you're interested in books and teacher librarian type perspective, check it out. And even if you're not, check it out and see. Just listen to their flow. Listen to what they're up to if you want. There's something exciting about that for me. Like when I discover a new podcast or just run into it, I listen and I just get a flavor. I get a feeling. Is this something I can get into? Is it something I can't get into? And I really enjoy the possibilities. I really enjoy what's out there now because like podcasting was a thing when I started, but I didn't feel like it had traction. And it was like, it's just this whole other world of learning, a whole other world of engaging with the world. That's so cool. And I remember like, as I got into it and as I discovered other podcasts, just a really cool feeling, even when you run into a podcast where you listen to an episode and it really gets you, like the episode is awesome. Then you try to listen to other episodes and it doesn't do anything for you. It was just like you found an episode that really got you into something. But then the next episode, you're like, this isn't doing it for me anymore. I think it's okay to come and go. I think one of the beautiful things about our podcast is we really don't care who listens to it. And I know we've said that many times, and I don't think we mean it in a rude way. We just mean like, if one day, we had 100 people listen to one episode and then the next episode is like 10, that doesn't do anything for us because that's not a metric that we value. It's great when people listen. It's even better when people engage. That's been the best part of the outside the box thinking around Decoded podcast. So the inside the box is the things we talk about every week and the way we've connected and the friendship we've built based on podcasting and educational stuff. That's the inside the box. The outside the box is when somebody sends us a message saying, hey, I just listened to the whatever episode and I think what you said here, I really agreed with that, but I got to push back on what you said here. Or I'd like to know more what you were thinking when you did this. That's really cool. And I enjoy that just because it gets me thinking about the podcast. It's nice that people hear something and they feel they want to act on what they heard. They want to know more, or they want to push back, or they want to agree and share something of themselves. That's like the golden nugget. I do value that. But if like people jump in, they listen, they don't like what they hear and they move on, that's okay. I'm not placing any value in that. I place more value in your time, your effort, what you're thinking about the things we're talking about. That's what I value. I don't know really what else to say.
I was going to mention I like it. I like it that just every once in a while, like it feels kind of cool and random when people comment back on the podcast. Like I appreciate that because then the other part, the cool random part, is the reminder that we're not the center of anyone's universe. We're really not. We are amongst many different podcasts that any number of people could land on. And to even have somebody listen for an extended amount of time, like to say that, in a conversation with them, you realize they've listened to like 45 minutes of it. You're like, oh man, like that's a big investment. Because we know from the other side what that looks like to set that up. Like we have an appreciation. We've managed to sort of figure out a way to meet each week and grow our lives around this in an organic fashion. But for someone else to come and land and listen for that amount of time, like that's sweet. That's really, really cool. And if it's, one person or 10 people, it tends to be more like the one or two people kind of chiming in. I love that. I love that they're able to sort of include us to whatever depth they can in their week. And I really do appreciate the every once in a while just kind of someone dropping in and saying, I listened to the episode and I was wondering what were you guys talking about this? Tell me a little bit more. There's something really cool and manageable about relationship building in there that I feel like I can, to sort of take any satisfaction or value in having 100 people that subscribe to our podcast, but not be able to talk to any of them. It goes back to you and I way back in the day. I think you were copacetic with this. I think it was just something that I was really pushing down your throat at the time. But it was kind of like that idea that when I try and connect with someone intentionally, and I'll say from a professional learning standpoint, so in my digital PLNs, like I am looking at this as a potential friendship. Like I'm trying to imagine what would it be like to spend more time with this person and get to know them. I don't naturally dispense with anyone that I interact with on the internet, as in, oh, that was just like, even someone that sort of throws down a like, I think to myself, I would like to talk to them more about that. You don't always get to it, but I hold on to that mindset that if I'm looking to connect with you online and I'm looking to follow you in your posts, that there's something deeper than just the content that you're posting. Now, it doesn't always work out, and sometimes I walk away from some of those and I unfollow or I mute. I do that. But I also like to try to keep the space that I'm looking to kind of wander around in, that neighborhood, digital neighborhood. I like to have familiar people in there. People move in, move out, so be it. But I like the idea that just every once in a while someone chimes in and says, hey, I noticed your content. It's like someone new has moved into the neighborhood and I want to get to know you. if it was a complete, if I had 500, if we had 500, 1,000 people that were just throwing us likes for the podcast, I know from the outside it's not likely that every single like that you receive is fortified with actually participating in your content, listening to the whole content. Like there's going to be an element of people that just point and click and like. So I really appreciate just the little intermittent, hey, how you doing? So a little sort of like, want to ask you a question, because it feels like a neighborhood that I can feel like I can participate in after you and I have had a conversation. Can I just add one more thing to that? Beth Lyons just wanted to mention, I actually, after we had our conversation, I downloaded the Libby app so that I could get some audiobooks. And the audiobook that I downloaded is something called Broken Monsters by Lauren. I'm going to say it's Beukes, Beukes, and it's fiction. So I went, I'm test driving an audiobook, some fiction. So that was a little bit a part of the conversation, how and I don't know how I'm going to action this, because it's kind of a really kind of creepy, scary story. So I don't know if I'm going to translate it. Anyone wants to know what I'm talking about, you got to listen to Roland's and my episode on Read Into This. But for me, it's about reading something and then doing something. And this, I think, is about serial killers. So,
God.
yeah, but it's actually kind of cool. It's I don't know if that does that come up.
A little bit now, yeah.
Yeah, it takes a second to kick in. So yeah, Broken Monsters. It's good. It's got a creepy feel to it. I feel like listening to an audiobook actually fulfills how I like to consume media right now, which is listening to it. I mean, I think that's my affinity for podcasts too. So there we go.
Along those lines, I do want to say thanks to the people that do listen to the podcast often.
Yep.
We appreciate it. Thanks for listening. I guess if you're coming back, there's something about it that you like. That's cool. So thanks. And you know what's interesting, Chris, what you were saying about, on social media, when you follow someone or when you try to look deeper or try to dig deeper in a way to build a relationship. It's funny that you say that, because there was a point in my social media growth development where that's what I wanted too. And now I've arrived at a place where I don't necessarily need that or want that anymore. I mean, I'm open to it, but it's not my number one goal. And it's interesting because I've noticed over time, it's that whole thing. I'm friends with you on social media. So what do I expect from you in real life? Right? And what I've come to realize, and my position has become, it's okay for people on social media to not want to talk to me in real life. And I know that kind of sounds extreme, but I'll give you an example. Recently, and I got to do it in a way that I don't give away the context, the people. I recently had a situation where one person said to me, "Hey, I just met a friend of yours." I'm like, "Oh yeah? Who'd you meet?" Then they say the name. And I say, "Oh, we're not friends." And they're like, "But you two follow each other on Twitter." I said, "That's true. We do follow each other on Twitter, but we're not friends." "Well, what do you mean?" "Well, I actually saw this person face to face recently, and I looked at the person with, I believe, the demeanor of, I'm willing to talk to you if you want to talk to me. But that person did not reciprocate. So either they didn't recognize me, or they did and they just didn't want to go there. Whatever the case is, I was fine with it. I'm okay with it, because I'm at that point where it's like, that's okay. I get it. It's one thing to live online with a PLN there. It's a whole other thing in person to give of yourself or to try to take from someone else. So it was just interesting. I'm like, no, we're not friends. And they're like, but you're you follow each other. I'm like, yeah, but we're not friends. Like, we're not real life friends. We're real life Twitter followers, but we're not real life friends. And there's some growing pains there. Like, I've been in a situation where I was at a mass gathering at my school board, and I was sitting in a seat, and this lady was walking past me, so I had to kind of get up out of the seat so she could walk past me. And I recognized her, and I said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And she said, "Good," and she kept walking. And I was like, I recognized her from my PLN on Twitter, but either she didn't recognize me or she did and just wasn't interested in going there. And I remember feeling a moment of embarrassment, not shame, but like just feeling like that icky feeling of when you wave to somebody and they're looking at you, but they don't wave back, and you feel like you've just embarrassed yourself. So I had a moment of that, and I was like, I had to tell myself, it's okay, Roland. Like, not sometimes people want to talk to you and you don't want to talk to them. And in this case, you were more than happy to talk to this individual, but for whatever reason, they weren't engaging the same way. So I I realized that that's a thing, and I'm okay with that thing. It's okay. Like, what are you gonna do, right? I can let that eat away at me or not, and I don't want to give it that kind of attention, so I'm not going to. Um, but it's whatever it is, right? Like, Twitter's one thing, Facebook's another thing. Um, and I'm a pretty open person, I think, in terms of people want to follow me on Facebook. I usually accept, but I recently got a couple of friend requests that I did not approve, just because I thought to myself, I know who you are and I know where you work, but we really don't have any connection. Like, like, I've not worked with you in the past. I don't work with you currently. I'm like, thanks for thinking of me and wanting to friend me on Facebook, but I just had a moment of, I don't really know you, and I don't know, maybe we have some common friends, but I don't really know you, so I'm not going to go there in this situation. Which is funny because I look at Facebook's algorithm, and you should see the people that they recommend I be friends with. It's like, they're people, I know of them, but there's no connection at all. And actually starting to get on my nerves. Like, I'm doing everything I can to say ignore, 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 to just throw the algorithm off. Like, the algorithm is so bad now with me that it's dying. It's like probably a red light somewhere at Facebook has gone off. They're like, this Chidiac guy is not accepting any of our recommendations. And like, because you are like at the bottom of the barrel. You're like scraping the bottom of the barrel. They're recommending some people that I don't even have friends with. And I'm like, who are these people? Like literally there was a couple of like just people, and I click on them to see who their friends are, and we have no common friends. I'm like, no. I I I I'm not in a space where I'm looking to make friends like that. I'm just not. I'm in a space where if I worked with you a few years ago and I thought we got along and you pop up, sure, I'd love to be your friend. And hey, you know what? I've requested to be friends with people that have not accepted it. And again, at first, that it stung. It stung because then you start to think like, well, why wouldn't this person want to be my friend? And if you funnel it down, it's one thing for me to it's one thing for a name to pop up in my friend list of someone that knows someone I know, and I know of them, they know of me, but we've never worked together, and there's really no connection other than that. It's one thing to request them to be a friend and they don't accept. But when you actually work with somebody like face to face every day, and you make a request and they don't accept, I don't know about you, but I start to think like, okay, so am I reading this wrong? Is there something to read? Like, am I reading this wrong? Like, at work, we seem to get along, but you don't want me. you don't want to connect with me in the virtual digital space. So there's a couple of things I think. Do you really not like me and you just pretend you do because we have to talk to each other face to face? Or are you just happy that face to face we can chit chat, but in digital world you're not interested in going there? Like, I just wonder. And, I could say to the person, hey, I asked you to be my friend on Facebook and you didn't accept. What's up? I could do that, but then I think I don't want to go there either because I don't value it that much. I don't value it that much, right? Like there's a superficial value, but then when I consider the superficial part of it and I put that aside, then I look at like the stuff that I really value. Is that stuff connected? Is it worth my time? The answer has been no. And again, because of my development in this area, I don't feel bad anymore. I used to. It used to hurt. It doesn't hurt anymore. It's just like, that's cool. And it happened recently. Somebody at my work that I work with, when I see this individual face to face, it's great. We chat. It's like not in-depth chat, but like you see them in the hall, you chat or whatever. And then they popped up on my thing, so I requested them, and I noticed that some of their friends are people at work that are my friends that I talk to every day as well. So I hit okay, and like a couple of days go by and nothing happens, and then like a couple of weeks go by, nothing happens, and you're still seeing the person at school face to face, and that they're checking their feeds because you've seen things that show that they're checking their feeds, but there's no friend accept. And I did find it a little bit amusing because I wonder what's going on there, but it's not enough to pursue. And that's, like I said, it's fine. So I went and I declined my friend request because I'm like, well, I'm not gonna just let it sit there. If you don't want to be my friend here, I'm okay with that. I would love one day to find out why, but it's not enough of a curiosity that's going to push me to push them and maybe make them feel uncomfortable. I wasn't in the mood to do that, so I wasn't going to go there. But it is interesting. It's interesting for sure. The people who have requested to be my friend, I usually accept unless, like I told you, it's far out there. I've never even talked to you face to face, and I know who you are and you know who I am, and we have some of the same friends, but I'm not interested in inviting you into my world. You can see pictures of my kids and read my rants and whatever, right? So it's interesting. So it was just funny. It was just funny, like, hey, you two are friends. I'm like, no, we're not friends. What do you mean you're not friends? Well, I actually did see this person face to face, and they wanted nothing to nothing to do with me. So I'm okay that we're friends, we're followers on one platform, but we don't talk in real life. I'm okay with that. That's okay with me. That's part of the world, and that's part of the way it works, and I'm okay with that.
I flex so for a long time when you talked about the algorithm, I've been blocking any tweet that comes to my TL that's promoted, I block it. Every single one. Every single one. I probably have 750 blocked accounts on Twitter. And sometimes there's people there. I also have a practice of blocking even. So that's an absolute. If it's a promoted tweet, I block it. If there's companies and corporations, if I haven't gone looking for them, so let's say someone is just promoting something for a company, I block that. So I'll go in and I'll actually block not the person, but the product or the company that they're looking for. I block that right away. On Insta, I flex the private, not private factor every once in a while. So I'll open it up when I'm feeling like I want to kind of broadcast widely or I can be found by the bots. There's times where I'm posting out to communities that I want to be a part of, and then I'll shut it down. So if I've gathered any new followers, any new people that are connecting with me, they would know no different. They would still be able to connect with me and talk about the stuff that I'm doing, but I would be closing the door to say there's enough people in the room right now. that's what I'm comfortable with. And that's how I've been playing with it. So trying to be trying to exercise some agency and intention in how I'm using my social media spaces. And also the one thing that you made me think about as far as the kind of evolving term of friends, being a friend, I still stick by the intention of trying to make real friends, not the friends prior to Facebook redefinition of friends, which ultimately kind of leads to the definition of saying followers, right? I still hold to the try to make real friends and also try to one of the ways that I find that I can measure if I'm on track to sort of building a friendship is if it moves from a big space to a smaller space. So if individuals are willing to sort of talk on DM or willing to text or willing to talk on the phone, I find like that's one metric I use to measure whether or not there's trust and vulnerability there to sort of build a friendship, something more, and a capacity to move beyond the social media definition of friendship, and also whether or not I'm on track with my intention, which is to make authentic connections. And it doesn't happen with everybody. And it doesn't automatically make an unfollow happen out of it. What it does is just give a clear delineation between this is a follower and this is a friend. And for me to sort of keep that clear in my head doesn't mean I don't value the relationship I have with someone who happens to follow what I do. I just don't invest. If the line has been clear, then I know where their line lies. Not necessarily mine, but I know where their tolerances lie. And I have to be comfortable with that because not everyone's like my intention to make a friend with someone doesn't trump someone's willingness to be my friend. I can't force people into that space. But yeah, I do that a little bit of that flex where I sort of open the door and close and lock the door every once in a while, and keep as many corporations out of my timeline as possible.
Interesting. I don't. I just ignore. I seem to ignore the corporations.
Yeah.
Like I see the promoted, and I just whatever. And depending on the company or the organization that's followed me, it depends on who they are and what they're about, whether I follow them back or not. Like the other day, I got a couple of new followers that were. I don't know if there's somebody behind the account.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I'm not following you or it or them or whoever they are. And
Yeah.
why are you following me? Like, I would love to know. What have I said or what tweet did you see that makes you believe that I'm a possible customer of yours? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the whole thing's interesting to me. I would love to do like formal work around it, but I'm not interested in the hassle that comes from turning something like this into something formal. I'm not interested at all in jumping through anybody's hoops or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. No, I gotcha. I got you, dude.
So we're at the 48-minute mark.
Mm-hmm.
You got anything else you want to talk about?
I don't think so. Not at this point. Not at this point. It's going to pop up during the week. We're going to, feed it into our timelines this week, and then we'll come back and reland next Saturday.
I'm a little bit bothered that we're only doing this on Saturday. And I don't, just because we're both, here's the funny thing, right? In the on-ramp to part one, I was telling you about the way time is a funny thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody's thinking everybody's got a lot of time.
Yeah, it's true.
But when you start breaking down your workday, your weekday, it's funny how time's getting sucked in all different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like, why are we waiting till Saturday to do our thing? But then at the same time, it's like, well, like, we're going to push this. I got to give you an example. So last night I wanted to work on the church drone video. And it was Sarah's turn to put the kids to bed or to deal with bedtime routines for them. So it was like my night off, right? But by the time I finished doing some schoolwork on the computer, went downstairs, got a bite to eat, got a drink, it's like 8:45 p.m. And now I'm like, well, I just want to relax, but I need to work on this video. So because I took so much footage, I'm downloading it off the drone and onto my phone so I can start to put something together. And the drone was giving me a hard time and it was going slow and yada yada yada. Next thing you know, it's 10:30 and I don't even have half the footage that I collected. So now I'm looking at this as like, oh, this is not a one night project. This is turning into, I'm going to need 2 or 3 nights. And then the reason why I delayed it so much is because I was trying to find a non-windy day that I could get over to the church to get some outside shots so I could have a well-rounded video outside, inside type thing. It's not worked out. So all of a sudden, my free time's gone. And it's not like we can podcast during the day because we're both teachers and we're both available to our administrators and our parents and our students from like 9 to 3 type of thing. So it's just weird, eh? It's like I'm not going anywhere and I'm in my house, but I have stuff that has to get done. And I don't know about your house, but my house is a disaster. So this weekend I'm cleaning the house because that's the other thing too. We have a cleaning lady. She's not been here in weeks. And we don't want her here until this whole thing ends. So we're in the middle of like well, somebody's got to clean the house, and it's going to be me because I want to do it. But I also want to work on my video, and I also want time to sit down and watch mindless television. So it's just interesting, eh? So part of me is like, why are we waiting till Saturday to do our podcast? Then when I look at it realistically, I'm like, oh, that's why, because we're both living our lives. We both have families and partners. And
we've also trained other people, and this is kind of what happens. Like we've trained other people to be empathetic to this space. So even if there's a bit of a head shake when I go upstairs, like, holy crap, you guys talked for a long time. It's the parcel that's been allotted for, us to commit to this pastime or hobby or whatever it is. It's this moment of connection is like, go for it, go do it. So that's the other thing. Like my family is cool with me taking the time to do it. There's a whole growth and negotiation that would have to happen to sort of move this to another evening or another space, which is not that it couldn't happen, but then you come back to how many of those spaces actually exist.
And it's funny because you're so right about the negotiation. Because, for example, when we went on Beth's podcast, Read Into This,
that's outside the schedule.
That was outside the schedule. So it was like,
because it was on a Sunday, right? Yeah.
Sunday at 1, like prime time type in the middle of family mix, which is like not a problem because we had so much time to prepare. I said to my family, this is what's happening at 1:00 on Sunday. And it was funny because my wife was in this mode. She was helping the boys clean their bedrooms, and we're talking like a deep clean. So on the Saturday she did the one, then on the Sunday she was going to do the other at that time. And I'm like, hold on here. I'm like, I don't want to interfere with your flow, but I'm going to be in the room, in the office. I'm doing a podcast. It'd be nice if the world didn't hear you and the boys arguing over whatever's going on in the next room, And it was just funny because she was like, I don't know if this happens at your house, but all of a sudden agreeing to something a week ago, things shift when you're in the middle of trying to do the thing that you agreed you were going to do. Mm-hmm. Right? All of a sudden it felt like, oh, should I be doing this right now? But then I'm like, no, this isn't cool. I made it clear a week ago that this was going to happen on this day at this time. So can I please have the time that everybody agreed I could have? Like it's interesting. But anyway, that was totally outside the realm of what you and I do. And it felt like it was an add-on.
And this is the next step. This is negotiating, like whatever the new normal is moving forward over the next couple of weeks through April, if it goes into May. I think the capacity to see the positivity in negotiating these moments will save relationships. Like just to be able to pause for a moment and say, okay, I know we've done it like this before. I know I was doing it like this just 5 minutes ago, but is it reasonable to hang on to this mode moving into this next 5 minutes? And just kind of taking that breather to go, okay, this actually this is a negotiated moment that just happened to be kind of standardized before this. So,
Which is that whole world is totally interesting to me now.
mhm,
This new way of operating, time schedules, it's something.
mhm,
It's something. And I tweeted out a tweet maybe last week. It just hit me where I was thinking about, man, what are people who don't spend a lot of time at home or whose homes aren't equipped to kind of care for the human for weeks on end.
mhm.
It brought this new reality to me, this new thought of, man, anybody who from this point forward is interested in buying a house or living in a space, will this be the test? Will this be the will COVID-19 be the updated test of
Like
is your living
compatibility tool.
is your living space able to sustain you if you have to stay in it every day all the time? And the answer for my house is yes.
Yeah, mine as
I'm
well.
fortunate. I'm fortunate that the house I live in has lots of rooms and spaces for people to do different things and for people to get some air and to breathe and to relax or to ramp up, whatever you're
Hmm.
looking for. I feel my house has that. My living space, I shouldn't call it a house because I could be in an apartment and feel the same way. But my living space, I'm good with my living space the way it is for this COVID-19 thing. But I think about the other people that their space is not conducive to being in it all the time for weeks
Hmm.
on end. And also I read a tweet that made me laugh. I shared it with my wife. It was so funny. Someone said something about somebody joked about there's going to be a lot of babies born in 9 months from
Hmm.
now. And then somebody responded with there's going to be a lot of firstborn children 9 months from now because anybody who has children, I mean, unless it's you've got a special relationship going on, it's not going to be happen. Nothing's going to be happening in 9 months.
Yeah.
And then somebody else has tweeted about the divorce rate. 9 months from now, let's look at the divorces that have occurred because of this COVID-19 situation. You and I can joke about it and laugh at it because of the way we're talking about it here. But for some people, this is a reality. Like
Hmm.
for some people, for people who live together that don't want to be together anymore, this is kind of this is torture, really, right? Or people who are on the way out and now everything's halted because of the world we're living in. Like that's not good for people.
For
It's
some, I was going to say that for some people, it's also being able to be out of the house is where there's self-reg and normalcy. Like a buddy of mine, he said, I didn't realize how much I was looking forward to making it back into work until I felt my sort of blood pressure kind of come down a little bit, my stress come down a little bit. And it has not, this dude is deep, he loves his family in a way that I can only aspire to. Like, it's just like when I think about the dad style, that's just unending and boundless. This dude is that guy. And he's having those same feelings of just craving to have the other, that connection, that structure that just kind of taps into what he feels is his new normal, right? Or makes him remember what his previous normal was because this has been such a big, in some ways, catastrophic kind of event that has impacted his sense of wellness. Like he's just feeling like he really needed that. So, and his
it,
work doesn't really. He is the boss, so he can do some of the digital management from a distance, But there is a whole lot of hands-on work that he has to do with it, like and human resource work, making the relationships, connecting with people, and there's a physical, actual product that needs to be moved around. So there is no recreating a digital sort of thing like we can do in teaching, like that we can sort of like enterprise beam it to another space and they can just kind of work on it. It isn't like that. It actually does take him to put physically his hands on something and make it happen. So I can appreciate that from his experience. I can appreciate that just as a father, and I can appreciate that on kind of a human level, just that need to reconnect with what felt normal before we kind of went into the bunkers.
Yeah, for sure, man. Oh, there's a lot there, eh?
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, mental health and wellness is key because really, if you're not feeling good, man, oh man, like everything's just so different.
Mm-hmm.
Can I drop one more funny thing before we go?
Yeah, for sure.
Every time the kids go at each other, my wife and I are like, "You guys don't understand. We don't want to go anywhere near a hospital. So if you guys hurt each other or somebody gets hurt, like you're gonna kill us. We don't need to be in those spaces right now."
Mm-hmm.
My wife told me she got a text from her friend the other day. Her friend's daughter fell, broke her arm. They had to go to the hospital. Here's the good news though. She said the hospital was emergency room was a ghost town. There was nobody
Oh.
in it. So the kid went in. It was relatively safe in terms of there weren't people there within 2 meters of you.
Mm-hmm.
They checked, she was in and out in a couple of hours. Kids fine, arms casted, but like
Oh, I totally like
that's totally.
you triggered me just thinking like I'm thinking. Oh, the
Well,
logistics.
my oldest, his braces broke. So
Yeah,
he,
Madeline has braces too. So
okay, so he had like one of the brackets was it broke,
yep.
but it was still in his mouth. And my wife and I said, well, make the best of it. Like, you're not going anywhere. The place is closed. So unless there's a problem, when we got emails from them saying, if this or this happens, please call us. We will be checking the phone and we will call you back and tell you what to do. But if those things aren't happening, do not
Yeah.
call us. We're not
It's the
seeing anybody.
emergency. We got something similar.
Yeah.
The only emergency surgeries are being performed right now. We'll be in touch.
So then the thing breaks right off. My wife looks at me and I'm like, that's worth a phone call. So
Yeah.
we're not those people now that are just calling for fun, like it's broken. So I call and I explain it. I'm like, it broke right off. It's the one that's key that does this and this.
Yeah,
What do we
because there's
do?
the anchor
Yeah.
ones. That's yeah. I gotcha.
So they called back and they're like, okay, is it this one? Is it this one? My wife just was like, give me the phone because she's explaining it to the lady. And the lady's like, okay, if it's what you're telling me it is, then there's a wire exposed and you're going to have to go in there and cut the wire. My
That
wife's
was
like, excuse me? She's like, well, it was the last one right on the back. So when it falls off, there's wire. There's like this much wire exposed
yeah.
and it could poke him in the side or whatever.
Yep.
The lady's like, you need to get in his mouth and you need to cut it at the bracket so it's not loose and poking.
Oh
So now my wife,
man.
my wife looks at my son like, you don't listen to your parents is what happens. So we boil um,
Wire.
fingernail clippers.
Okay.
That's what they want us to use. So we boil them for 20 minutes. That's what they told us to do. And we use tongs to take them out and dry them off. And then we basically hold my son down like a friggin' pig in mud.
Oh my
He's like, I
god.
don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. So Sarah goes in there to do it. And she's not strong enough to clip the wire. But now the the tool is now dirty.
Yeah.
The wire's okay still. So she wasn't even strong enough to like make a dent in it. So my son says, you know what? The wire's straight. It's not poking me anywhere. It's not
Mm-hmm.
getting in the way. So can we just leave it alone until it becomes a problem? And my wife and I looked at each other. We're like, we agree. We can see it. It's not a lot and it's straight. So it's not out or anything like that. We're like, be careful when you eat. The
Oh
minute something
man.
bothers you, you got to let us know. And my wife is like, your dad will go in there and rip them right out of your mouth. So be careful because if you're messing around, he's going in. And she's looking at me and she's looking at him and she's like, your dad's not going to play. He's going to basically get you down, stick whatever tool he has in his hands in your mouth and rip and cut it off. And he's looking at her like, he's like, I get it. I'm not messing around. I know dad will do that. So in the middle of all this, I'm just shaking my head. I'm like, okay, well, it's not, we'll call them. They don't need to see you. So we're good. And if they do need to see you, they've made it clear. You come to the door, we let the kid in.
Yep.
You stay outside.
That was the same. Yep.
And we just deal with whatever comes our way at that point. And it's like, well, we don't want that to happen. So I think the little one was like, oh my God, we do have kind of an emergency, and that means we have to go and expose ourselves to people. And we're looking at him like, so stop being such a doofus and like live a little bit extra careful so that we don't end up in a situation where we have to be exposed to people that we don't know where they've been. They don't know where we've been. That's not cool. So it's just, I was like, oh my God, people are having babies, eh? Like the world doesn't stop. Like people are going to the hospital.
They're kind of superhero status to me when they say we just welcomed a 7-pound. What I'm like, oh my God, like you're making kids in the middle of this. Like that's like uber hopeful. Well, you don't have a choice. I mean, it's not like,
I know.
It's not like you can actually reschedule, right? But it's just those moments that pop up, like whatever you think is your life challenge in front of you. There's more than enough other versions out there that can kind of, you check your head on and you're like, wow. So, dude, you want to see the pic?
I do.
Okay, so.
EDU and new you. What is that, a shoe? No, that's a person. Oh, geez. It's the whole parachute thing again, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah. A little bit of I was thinking bungee.
I like it. Well, see, what I see is the bungee, and then I see something from their arms. I'm assuming, I don't know what that is. Are they papers? I love the satellite. And I love that the underneath the word you is the ground being ripped right out of the ground.
Can you see the details in the ground?
Does it say something?
Yeah.
L411?
No, you're gonna have to wait for the photos to come.
Okay.
You'll see it in the picture. The two little you'll see it in the picture. It's easier to see the resolution, right? So EDU and new you.
I love it. That's cool. Hey, I'm glad we were able to do part 2 today.
Part 2 is longer than part 1.
Because imagine if we had to tell our wives that we need to jump in tomorrow and do part 2.
I know. And I know going back upstairs today is all about switching it. Like we're switching the batteries in the fire,
okay.
The alarms. We've got a ton of little organizational things that we want to have in place before we get into next week. Today's also groceries.
Oh.
So, and I'll be working remotely with my mom to try and get her set up on Skype. Can I ask you something? Then I've never asked you this before. Are we live on YouTube right now as well?
We are, yes.
Oh, cool. So it parallel broadcasts. So we're
live on YouTube. So people like our subscribers get an email that says
they know we're doing this.
This is happening right now. Click
That's
here and
beautiful.
you can watch. And then when we end the broadcast, it's all recorded and pushed and left on YouTube.
Perfect.
So right now it's being streamed live.
Cool. Do you get analytics as far as if on your end, if anyone is actually viewing while we're on?
On my end, right at the top of the screen where it tells me that we're live and how long we've been going for, there's a little eyeball.
Yeah.
And it always says 0.
Okay. Just confirming.
The one time Carlos came on.
Okay, cool.
And that was like, we were like 2 kids in a candy store that day.
Okay, cool. That's it. That's cool. I like that.
Okay.
All right, man. So
have a great day. Have a great weekend.
And we'll be chatting during the week, dude. Okay?
For sure. Peace out.
Peace.